Hello everyone, and welcome to the MLOps workshop. Today we are going to be walking through the Cortex platform. At a high level, Cortex is an open source platform for deploying machine learning models as production web services. From what I can see, it looks like it currently only works with AWS right now, but I imagine there will be support for other cloud providers in the future. Let's take a look at some of the key features of the platform. It offers multi-framework support. This means we can build models using PyTorch, TensorFlow, or scikit-learn and serve them through the platform. It has built-in auto-scaling. This is a huge benefit. You can typically think of auto-scaling in two ways. The first being the number of running copies of your model. For instance, let's say you have a model that takes 3 seconds for inference per request. If thousands of requests come in over a short time frame, it's going to take a long time for a single copy of your model to serve them all. Tools like Kubernetes can dynamically scale up the number of copies for a given model. The second way to think about auto-scaling involves the underlying infrastructure. You can think of this as being the servers that the copies of your model are running on. As we add more and more copies of our model to handle the volume of requests, we might run out of room on the physical server. This means that we have to enable auto-scaling for our servers as well. The good news is Cortex takes care of both for you. Cortex also supports both CPU and GPU utilization for model inference. This can be beneficial for computationally expensive processes. The platform allows us to use spot instances. This can substantially reduce your bill at the end of the month. I have used spot instances both personally and professionally, and I highly recommend you look into them. It also provides rolling updates, where we can update a model without any downtime. This is often accomplished by spinning up a new version of the model alongside the current running version. It will then conduct a few health checks to make sure that the new model is up and running properly. During this whole process, traffic is still being routed to the old model version. If the health checks succeed for this new model, it will then and only then destroy the old version and start routing traffic to the new updated version. And lastly, it provides logging and prediction monitoring. This is an important and often overlooked area in software. So what is Cortex similar to? Cortex is an open source alternative to serving models with something like AWS's SageMaker, or maybe building your own model deployment platform on top of AWS services like Elastic Kubernetes or Elastic Container Services using EC2 instances. Cortex essentially does all of the heavy lifting for you, which is awesome because rolling out your own deployment platform with all of these capabilities built in would be difficult and time consuming. So how does Cortex work? You can deploy a model quickly and easily using the Cortex CLI tool. Each model is loaded into a Docker container, along with any Python packages and request handling code. The model is exposed as a web service using Elastic Load Balancers, TensorFlow serving, and ONNX runtimes. The containers are orchestrated using a Kubernetes cluster on Elastic Kubernetes Service, also known as EKS. This is a managed Kubernetes service that AWS provides, while logs and metrics are streamed to CloudWatch. All right, it's time to get hands-on with Cortex. Okay, so let's navigate over to the install section. So in here, we'll see that there are a few prerequisites. We'll need to have Docker installed, and we'll have to have AWS credentials. Now, the AWS credentials that they're referencing here are not the ones that you use to log into the console in the browser. These are the AWS secret key and AWS access keys that you get when you give a user CLI privileges on AWS. These are basically the keys that you enter when you run the AWS config setup from the command line. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is install the CLI. We can do that by copying and pasting this bash command into a terminal. I've already done this, so you can go ahead and copy and paste this into your terminal now. The next thing that we'll do is we need to run Cortex cluster up. So this is all of the infrastructure that I described previously. This is where it sets all of that up. And we can see that this will create resources in your AWS account which aren't included in the free tier. So for example, EKS clusters, 2 load balancers, and EC2 instances. So for this part, I recommend that you watch me go through it first, as you know, we can see that some of the services that Cortex will be spinning up are not free. It won't cost much, but if you do follow along, make sure to destroy everything when you are done so that you don't end up with a bill at the end of the month. So before we run Cortex cluster up, let's look at what this command is actually going to be doing. So we can see a link up here, see configure or cluster configuration to learn how to customize your cluster. Let's click on this. So here we can see that we can pass in a custom cluster.yaml file using the config flag when we run Cortex cluster up. But by default, these are the values that are provided. So we can see that there's a cluster name, a region, instance type. So remember before when we were reading that certain resources on AWS are not free. This is an example, M5 large. These are not covered in the free tier. We can see a minimum number of instances and a maximum number of instances. So this is related to the auto scaling of the infrastructure that I was mentioning before. And then spot instances and just a whole list of their Docker related image paths. So now that we have a better idea of what's going to happen when we run Cortex cluster up and we know how to configure that process, let's go ahead and run it. So let's go back. So yeah, just copy, and you can copy and paste Cortex cluster up into your terminal. I've done this already just because it takes about, I believe they mention it somewhere in here, that it actually takes about 15 minutes for this to, oh yeah, here we go. So spinning up the cluster takes about 15 minutes. So I ran this beforehand just so that we wouldn't have to wait. Once you run Cortex cluster up, you'll see it presents you with providing an email address, an AWS region. I changed it from the default US West 2 to CA Central 1. The NS3 bucket, I believe this is where Cortex sends logs to S3. The AWS instance type that you want, a minimum and maximum number. Yeah, and then it just walks through. So, as we said, this isn't covered under the free tier, so you can get an idea of what this configuration is going to cost you per hour. Yeah, so it walks through the whole process, and after about 15 minutes, everything was up and running, and we can go into the Amazon console actually and take a look. So we can see that right now I'm in the EKS service. So you can get there by going to the services and in the search bar typing in EKS. And here we can see our Cortex cluster. And then we can also go and take a look at the EC2 dashboard. And in here we can see that we have 2 running instances and 2 load balancers. So that's exactly what the default config said we should have. Yeah, and we can see everything's up and running. So now that we have our cluster up and running, let's deploy a model. Cortex docs are actually really well done. They have quite a few good examples that we can follow along with. So let's go ahead and git clone the Cortex Labs repo. And in there they have a bunch of example projects. So let's go over to a terminal and let's run the git clone operation. Okay, so we've ran that. We can see there's a Cortex directory now. So if we go into there, we can go into cd into examples. Let's go to examples, sklearn, and then we'll go into iris classifier. All right, so we can see that there's a cortex.yaml, a predictor, requirements. So let's go back to I know this example is using a TensorFlow, the iris classifier, but I just decided to use the sklearn one. So we can see that what we do is we navigate to the directory, which we've already done, and we run Cortex deploy. So let's run that here. And there we go. A iris classification model is now up and running. So you can see how quick and easy that was. So I believe we can run Cortex get, and then we'll pass in the name of the model that we gave it, and it's going to return some details about it, one of which is we can see it has an endpoint and a sample curl command. So let's copy this sample curl command, and we can see it's using something called sample.json. So we're still in the directory that we CD'd into after cloning the Cortex repo. And if we look at the contents of this directory, we'll see there is a samples.json. So let's go ahead and cat that. So we can see it's just a sample JSON body that it's going to send as a request to the server. Just the sepal length, width, petal length, and petal width. So if we go ahead and paste this curl command and run it, we can see we've actually gotten back a prediction Setosa. We can also analyze the logs. This, I believe, is the status of the API. So if we had this up and running, you would be able to see, average inference times. You can see number of requests, API specific details. If we hit Control C to get out of that, we can run Cortex logs. And here we can see at the very bottom, info.payload, right, sepal length, sepal width, petal length, petal width. So this was what was in our sample.json. This is what we sent as a post request to the API, and we can actually even see the prediction that it returned, Setosa. So Control C again to get out of that. And yeah, so you can see how quick and easy and seamless this whole process has been. All right, so that is Cortex. I hope that you can all appreciate how quickly and easily it is to spin up a production grade, highly scalable and resilient solution using this platform. I really like the platform. I think that there's a lot of big things to come out of this platform in the future, and I would highly recommend that you look into it further to see how you could use it. So, and I think we'll probably dig into it a little bit more during the workshop as well. So, but for now, let's make sure that we go ahead and delete everything. So we already deleted the iris classifier, but if you were following along and you did run this command Cortex cluster up, I'm going to have you navigate to this uninstall section. So in here, you don't have to worry about these commands that are user local bin. This is just where it stored the executable. This is if you wanted to remove Cortex from your system, but we just want this one command right here, Cortex cluster down. This way we're not, if you follow along, we won't be billed for the infrastructure for the rest of the month. It'll only be billed for what we used it for. So let's go ahead and run Cortex cluster down. It's going to ask you, everything's going to be deleted. Let's go ahead and say yes. All right, and here we can see that it's spinning down the cluster. This will likely take a little while, so I don't think it'll take quite as long as it took to spin up the cluster, but when this command does finish running, I would recommend that you also go ahead and go to your AWS console and just walk through a sanity check, just make sure that the EKS Cortex cluster has been removed. And then we should probably also check our EC2 dashboard and make sure that the running instances, and yeah, we can see that my load balancers have already been dropped. So let's just make sure the load balancers, the running instances, and the volumes. Basically, just make sure that everything that should be gone is gone. And yeah, I think that's everything. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the Cortex demo.